Go ahead and subscribe, please.
This case takes place in the UK in the 1980s. A few days before Christmas 1984, golfers in Buckinghamshire stumbled upon something sinister. On the outskirts of a golf course, in the gloom of December, hidden amongst overgrown hedges, lay the body of a woman. When police arrived at the isolated scene, they found no identification and no clothing, just evidence of extreme violence. As officers secured the site, they were optimistic about the investigation ahead. They believed they would find the killer swiftly, but they had no idea they were at the start of a case that would span decades. Stay locked in for one of the most remarkable true crime stories in British history. Dree Sainsbury was born into privilege in the mid-1950s. Her father was a respected psychiatrist who held a prominent position in his field, yet Dree consciously rejected the comforts and advantages her upbringing provided. She sought neither public attention nor social status. Instead, she chose to embrace a life defined by principle. By her late 20s, Dree had become deeply entrenched in Britain's women's peace movement. She passionately despised nuclear weapons and committed herself fully to activism against their deployment. She was known among fellow activists for her gentleness. Like many young people at the time, she frequently hitchhiked. Her friends often joked that Dree could always be found standing by the roadside, optimistically waiting for a lift. In late December 1984, Dree set out from London, heading toward Oxford, where she planned to spend the Christmas holiday with her family. Standing beside the busy road, she confidently raised her thumb and waited for a passing driver to stop. A vehicle soon pulled over to offer her a lift. Trusting as always, Dree climbed into the car, expecting nothing more than a routine journey home. Tragically, this would be the last journey she ever made. Meet Colin Frederick Campbell. Colin was born on the 16th of September 1947 in India during the final days of British colonial rule. By adulthood, he was living in London. All that is known about Colin is that he worked as a traveling salesman and enjoyed playing hockey. It was after one of his hockey games that he ran into Dree. As he was driving, he happened to notice a hitchhiker and pulled over. This was Dree. She needed a ride, so she climbed in, relieved and likely unaware of any danger. Campbell introduced himself, and they chatted as strangers do. Once he learned her destination, he steered his dark Ford northwest toward Oxford. At first, nothing seemed amiss. They were just another driver and passenger sharing a ride on a winter night. But as they left the city lights behind, Colin veered off the main route. Dree became confused. Colin offered little reassurance, saying he just wanted to go to a quiet location so they could talk and cuddle. He turned down a quiet country lane near Middlesex. In the secluded darkness of the backroads, Dree's fear likely grew. Colin then pulled over and made unwanted advances toward her. Dree resisted, forcibly pushing him away and striking him across the face in self-defense. Enraged by the rejection, Colin's temper snapped. In a flash of violence, he retaliated by punching her with all his strength. The blow landed on her neck and throat, causing catastrophic injury. Dree began to choke and gurgle as her windpipe filled with blood. Colin now found himself alone on a deserted lane with a gravely injured woman who could identify him. According to Colin, panic and adrenaline took hold. Instead of seeking medical aid, he chose a path of terror. He decided to silence Dree permanently. What unfolded next was a scene of pure horror, pieced together later from Colin's own chilling admissions. With Dree injured and gasping for air, Colin did not drive to a hospital nor seek any help. Instead, he secured her in the front passenger seat with a seatbelt to contain her and the situation. He then sped off into the night, driving aimlessly through the outskirts of West London. Dree drifted in and out of consciousness. At some point, she came to as her body fought for life despite the trauma to her throat. She coughed and gurgled on her own blood. Colin later described himself as frightened and not thinking clearly. Supposedly overwhelmed by the fear that she might survive and report him to police, he made a monstrous decision. He reached over and wrapped his hands around Drage's neck, attempting to strangle her. In his own words, it seemed like an eternity. He squeezed and released multiple times, not even sure how many attempts he made to end her life. Drage fought back, struggling for survival despite her grievous injuries. In the chaos, he stopped the car again. She managed to resist and even tried to fend him off once more, but he struck her repeatedly to subdue her. Strangulation and punches were not enough. He resorted to something else, his hockey stick, the same stick he had used earlier that day. As she struggled to leave the car and escape, he swung the hockey stick at her viciously. The stick crashed into her throat with such force that it further crushed her larynx and cervical spine. Drage's fate was sealed. Whether from strangulation or the combined trauma, her body finally went limp. But even after Drage fell silent, Colin was not done. Gripped by what he would later describe as blind panic, he sought to disguise his responsibility. In a grotesque attempt to mislead investigators, he proceeded to mutilate Drage's body with a knife, inflicting horrific post-mortem injuries. The purpose, he later admitted, was to make it appear as though an unknown maniac had carried out the attack. He removed every article of her clothing and then stabbed her an insane number of times, targeting her chest and genitals. It's believed he stabbed her private area around 60 times. Rather than leave the clothing with the body, Colin kept these incriminating items, stuffing them into his car, perhaps as trophies. Under cover of darkness, he then drove onward with Drage's corpse in the back seat. Sometime during the night, he arrived at a golf club in Buckinghamshire, roughly 20 miles from where he had picked her up. He dragged her body into a waterlogged ditch at the edge of the course and callously dumped her among the winter foliage. What had started as a chance meeting on the side of the road had spiraled into one of the most violent crimes West London had ever seen. The investigation began almost immediately after her body was found on the morning of 23 December 1984. A groundskeeper reportedly spotted what he thought was a discarded mannequin in a waterlogged ditch. Only on closer inspection did he realize to his horror that it was a woman's corpse. Police identified Drury very quickly. From the outset, detectives were struck by the savagery of the crime. Initially, there was speculation that this could be the work of a roaming psychopath, or perhaps a retaliatory act connected to Drury's well-known activism. However, crucial evidence soon steered investigators away from any theory of political motive. A witness came forward with a startling story. The previous day, they had seen a young woman hitchhiking and getting into a dark car driven by a lone man. Something about the scene prompted the witness to jot down the vehicle's registration number. That split-second decision would prove vital. Police traced the plate to Colin Campbell. Within days, officers knocked on Colin's door. He played ignorant, but investigators noticed suspicious clues. They obtained a warrant and searched his home and vehicle. Hidden away were items of women's clothing later identified as belonging to Drury, the very clothes missing from the crime scene. Confronted with this evidence, Colin was arrested on suspicion of murder. In custody, he soon confessed he had picked Trika up while hitchhiking and that she had died during their encounter. Yet his confession was far from straightforward. He spun a self-serving tale, claiming it was an accident brought on by a medical episode. He made an advance, she rejected it, he suffered an epileptic fit during which he somehow killed her, and he had not meant to harm her. Seasoned detectives were deeply skeptical. The sheer brutality, the strangulation, the excessive beating, the post-mortem mutilation did not line up with an uncontrolled seizure. They discovered he did have a history of epilepsy, but also a temper and a tendency to become violent when angry. Blood matching Trika's was found in his car. Within days, Colin was formally charged with her murder. His trial began in July 1985 at Reading Crown Court and drew massive media attention because of the shocking nature of the crime. The defense conceded he was responsible for Trika's death, but argued diminished responsibility due to provocation and an epileptic seizure triggered by her striking him. He pleaded not guilty to murder, but guilty to manslaughter. The prosecution rejected the plea and insisted on a murder trial. After harrowing testimony, Colin took the stand himself. Medical experts gave conflicting opinions about epilepsy and violence. On 26 July 1985, the jury found him guilty of murder. He was sentenced to the mandatory life imprisonment. When the sentence was handed down, the judge emphasized that the murder was pointless and brutal. Hearing the words, Colin collapsed in the dock and had to be carried unconscious from the courtroom. Yet even as Colin began his life sentence, the full truth of his crimes had not yet come to light. Over the following decades, the case took several unsettling turns. In the 1990s, he launched appeals citing his epilepsy and improper medication. In 1996, his murder conviction was quashed. At a 1999 retrial, he pleaded guilty to manslaughter on grounds of diminished responsibility. The plea was controversially accepted. He was again sentenced to life, but now became eligible for parole after serving 13 years. Despite multiple hearings, parole boards repeatedly deemed him too dangerous. By 2011, however, he had been moved to an open prison, Category D, and was allowed monthly visits outside. He was moving steadily toward potential freedom. Then modern forensic science intervened. Dree was not his first victim. In the summer of 1981, Colin had crossed paths with 17-year-old Claire Watlington. Claire was a lively, kind girl who loved her family. On the evening of Thursday, 27 August 1981, she finished work at a London amusement arcade and walked home alone along Oaksbridge Road after a minor argument with her boyfriend. Sometime around 10 p.m., Colin forced her into his car. He attacked her with extreme violence and took her life. Claire fought desperately, as defensive injuries later proved, but she could not survive the attack. The pattern of injuries was disturbingly similar to what he would later do to Dree. Before dawn, he drove roughly 20 miles to the Thames near Windsor, intending to hide her body in the river. The body landed on a footpath instead and was discovered at sunrise. A major murder investigation was launched, but with no CCTV and only brief witness sightings, the case went cold for 30 years. Crucially, in 1981, crime scene technicians used adhesive tape lifts to collect microscopic traces from Claire's skin and clothing, preserving them for technology that did not yet exist. In 2011, cold case reviewers re-examined the evidence with modern DNA techniques. A full male DNA profile was obtained from those decades-old samples and matched perfectly to Colin Campbell, who was already serving life for Dree Sainsbury's murder. In November 2012, at the age of 65, Colin was rearrested and charged with Claire's murder. At his 2013 trial, the prosecution showed the haunting similarities between the two cases. His earlier epilepsy defense was no longer accepted. Colin claimed he had no memory of the events, or suggested Claire might once have sat on his knee at the arcade many years earlier. That explanation was completely dismissed by the court. On 4 December 2013, Colin Campbell was found guilty of Claire Watlington's murder. He showed no emotion as the verdict was read. He received another life sentence with a minimum term of 24 years, meaning he will almost certainly die in prison. The judge noted that he had never shown any remorse and had denied Claire's family justice for over 3 decades. Claire's mother never recovered from the loss. Her older brother suffered severe mental health problems because the case remained unsolved for so long, and sadly passed away just weeks before the 2013 trial, never seeing the day her sister's killer was brought to justice. The judge who had accepted the reduced charge for Dree's case in 1999 later publicly said he regretted the decision and that it should always have remained a murder conviction. Today, at 78 years old, Colin Frederick Campbell remains behind bars with no possibility of release. He has never expressed remorse for the 2 young lives he destroyed. Thanks to preserved evidence and 21st-century DNA science, this dangerous offender will spend the rest of his life in prison.